Time for the meeting has arrived. This is a meeting of the Special Joint Committee on Georgia Revenue Structure. At our last meeting, Majority Leader O'Neill suggested it might be a good idea for this committee to reconvene and hear from the Department of Revenue on the implementation of the integrated tax software technology. That is the sole purpose of this meeting and the sole agenda item. And I don't know who's going to start, Commissioner, in terms of who's going to be doing the presenting, but, here's the Commissioner here. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman, and Chairman Heath. Thanks for having us today. What we did is I put a few slides together that both talk about the integrated tax system, but then also sort of generally what the department's doing, what we're up to, and what else we're working on. But I am, of course, happy to answer whatever questions you have or address whatever issues you may have as well. If you want to flip the slide. To be known as a business-friendly state from the tax perspective, I think requires really two things. One is good tax policy, good tax laws, and Georgia certainly has that. The other is to make sure that we are administering those tax laws in as friendly a way as possible. You can have great policy, great tax rates, great policy, and if you have bad implementation and bad administration, you don't have a great tax state. And we are certainly working on that. You can see our mission, but it really boils down to three things. We have to have good customer service, we have to be efficient operators, and we have to have an effective compliance program to be able to fulfill our mission. If you can see the tax revenues, these numbers y'all are very familiar with. These are the last 4 years and the precipitous fall off in tax revenue here in the state of Georgia. The next slide shows the first 5 months of this fiscal year. We've gotten through December, but we haven't finished closing the books and releasing those numbers yet. So this is through November of this year, and you can see tax revenues for the first 5 months year over year are up just about 7%. 6.8%. Those numbers will come down some in December. As I said, the numbers aren't finalized, but December was not as strong year over year. They're down, but the numbers will still be up for the year through the first half, through the first 6 months of this fiscal year. As I mentioned, the three things that we are working on at the department are improving our customer service, driving efficient operations, and then working on compliance, especially given the fact that the legislature has appropriated over $22 million to the department over the last 2 fiscal years to focus on those two, or to focus on the compliance area. On integrated tax, this slide shows you the implementation schedule that the department has been on in converting its systems from old siloed mainframe tax administration to a more integrated tax platform, which we call ITS, the Integrated Tax System. The first implementation was in May of '09, and then you can see the dates as they have rolled forward. Most importantly, in November of last year, we converted our individual tax system over from the old mainframe system to our ITS system. That was the single largest conversion. We have over 4 million individual taxpayers in the state. All of their information was moved over to our new platform. And in any big implementation, you can expect to see some hiccups. I think we have gotten through it very well. The problems that we have had, we've been able to identify, isolate, and then manage through. There will still be some things that pop up as we get to a stable platform over the next couple months. But so far, 2 months into it, I think everybody's very happy with the conversion. Now, part of the proof in the pudding will be after we run it through a tax season, which we are starting in less than 10 days. So time will tell, but so far, so good. I think it's worth noting on all of these, and I obviously have not been around for all of these, having only been in the job for a year. My understanding, and certainly with this year's, is all of these implementations have been on time and at or under budget. which is pretty impressive. I know many of you have had experience implementing big IT projects. Most folks, most companies, most enterprises cannot say that with any sort of large implementation of an IT conversion like this. And these have been big. I think the total bill, I think it's all been bond money that y'all have appropriated, is nearly $40 million for the build of these systems. So that these are big IT projects, and so far they have gone in well and gone in on schedule. From this new tax system, over time, I think you can expect to see improvement in a number of areas at the department. One is customer service. As opposed to our old systems where you could not look across a taxpayer and look at all their tax information, we now have the ability for our customer service folks to look at and see all the types of tax being filed. It's all in one place. You can pull it up at one time, and it makes it a lot easier to provide good customer service to taxpayers. From an efficiency standpoint, we also ought to start seeing some improvement as well. We've moved off mainframes onto servers. I'm not an IT guy, but anybody who knows anything about computers knows that in today's world that's a much more efficient way to run your business. We also, as part of the ITS conversion, have made it a lot easier for folks to self-help. Much like in the banking industry, if we can get people to do some of their own transactions online, on the phone, that's less people that we have to have answering the phone, less people we have to have answering mail, and that certainly is much more efficient. And I think, and importantly to this group of folks, to the legislature, over time our information reporting ought to be better too. We're able to capture better information. I think we have more confidence in the information we're capturing and in more detail. And over time, as we feed information into the system, we ought to be able to crank out better reports so that you can make better policy decisions. I know from time to time, folks have struggled with, like, for instance, credit. The amount of credits that are being taken under many of the tax credits. Over time, as we populate the system with the information, we ought to be able to crank out a lot better reports for y'all and make better decisions. The other things, there's been a number of other initiatives that have been underway to increase operational efficiency. Most revolve around moving people from paper to electronic commerce. Filing electronically, moving money electronically, not printing out paper and sending it wherever we can. Every piece of paper we send out costs at least $1. By the time you put a stamp on it, print out the letter, put it in an envelope, every piece of paper we send out, and you'll see a chart in a second, we send out a lot of paper. So everything we can do to avoid sending paper drives efficiency at the department and therefore for the state. The next slide does show the number of pieces of paper we send out in a year, and you can see over the last 4 fiscal years we send out a lot, 11 million pieces in 09, 10. It's come down some in 11, and our hope is in 12 it continues to move down as well. And part of in my year at the department, part of the learning or one of the things that I've certainly recognized is our ability to generate work for taxpayers has far exceeded our ability to handle the work that comes back to us from the stuff we send out, from all the penalties, assessments, notices we send out. Every time a taxpayer in Georgia gets one of those pieces of paper, they have to do something with it. They either pick up the phone and call us, they send us a letter, they hire a CPA, or they give it to their CPA to send it to us. And our ability to handle that backflow of work has not been adequate over time. And if you flip to the next slide, this is call volume to the department. You can't add up the totals, I don't think, from where you sit, but in 08 we had over 1.2 million calls, same in 09. In 10 and 11 those numbers have come down, but there's still 750,000 to 800,000 phone calls that come back to the department every year from all the stuff that we send out. And that generates a lot of wait times on our phone system. You can see here over time, at the worst time in the department in the last several years, the average wait time for a call back to the department was just after the first of the year in 2010, and that average wait time was over 50 minutes. So that means your average taxpayer was, or the average call was not answered for at least 50 minutes by the department. And when I've spoken to groups around the state, I make the point, not only are we torturing taxpayers, we're torturing our own employees at the department too. There's nobody who leaves that transaction happy. Nobody. I don't care what we tell the taxpayer on the phone, they're not going to be happy. And imagine you work at the department and your job is to answer the phones every day, day after day. You know the next person you're about to talk to has been on hold for 50 minutes, an hour, hour and a half. It's got to be a miserable job, and we don't pay those people a ton of money. So it's bad all across the board, and something we need to work on. And you can see in this year we've tried to drive down those numbers. My view is those numbers ought to be in the single digits. The wait times ought not be more than a minute to 2 minutes, certainly no more than 5 minutes. And we ought to be able to provide a level of customer service that is at least comparable, or at least as good as that you would find in the private sector. And then the final slide shows abandonment rates, which are tied to wait times. People call, they hang up, they call back. And again, you can see at its highest point, it was up over 70%. That means 70% of the calls people would hang up before they could get served, which makes sense. If you had to wait 50 minutes, you'd call and find something else to do in that 50 minutes and hang up and then call back. And you can see we try to manage those times down. Again, those should be in the single digits as well. We're not there yet, but we are certainly measuring it and working on it. And then finally, the other thing that our new integrated tax system should help with is dealing with a lot of backlogs that we have at the department. So again, every time we send out a letter, an assessment, a notice, people respond to that. And we have built up a considerable backlog of work at the department. At least now we can get our hands around it. We were able to segregate it and find out a lot of this is very low dollar stuff. I think we had 16,000 of these were penalties for less than $25. Nobody's getting a lot of benefit out of us spending a lot of time on these low dollar items. So we've been able to clean some of this stuff out of the system and start really working on things that are beneficial to the state, that do move the needle for the state. And then finally, I think it's worth sharing with y'all some numbers on the appropriations that you have made to the department over the last 2 years. In fiscal year 11, just over $9 million was appropriated to the state, or excuse me, it was appropriated to the department to hire about 150 folks, all focused on compliance. You can see we measure their activity. I want to make clear, both here and again everywhere I've spoken, there's no such thing as a quota system at the department. In fact, under no circumstances is there a quota for any of these folks. These are revenue agents and auditors. But it is important to measure what they do and therefore have an understanding of what tax gap may exist out in the world. And you can see that $9 million of costs, 150 employees in 11. Those folks generated about $82 million worth of additional collections to the department. And so far in fiscal year 12, through 6 months, they've generated about 61 million and change of additional revenue to the state. If you flip to the next slide, and I'll go back and forth here for a second, but to the next slide, in fiscal year 12, the year we're halfway through, y'all appropriated an additional $13 million to the department, again focused on compliance. About 130 folks in a balance between compliance and customer service. And you can see the numbers there. Those folks have collected or blocked returns of, and I'll get to that in a second, of about $82 million to the state. I think if you look at those two slides, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to kind of look at the numbers and really focus in on the place that I think has gotten the best return and provides still the greatest opportunity to be a better and more efficient tax administration is around the fraud that occurs here in the state. You can see a very small number of folks who work in our Office of Special Investigations have blocked an enormous number of returns, an enormous dollar value of returns over the last 2 years. And I don't think anybody at the department, including myself, feels like we are blocking all of the fraud that goes out in the world. And if you flip to the next slide, I think it ties into some of our initiatives for the remainder of the year. One is we have, I think, finalized a additional step in fraud prevention program at the state. that will hopefully make us even more effective in blocking fraudulent returns. A perfect example is my wife this summer, her identity was stolen, or someone somehow got a hold of her Social Security number, filed a tax return with her name, her Social Security number, and a new address. They just made up an address, filed and got a return from the state. Until now, we really haven't had the systems or the information that would have identified that as a fraudulent return. We're going to partner with an information provider that will give us better information, and we think we'll be able to block a large number of additional returns to help keep money going out the door. And those folks who are filing fraudulent returns are doing no different than stealing from the state treasury. You and I and all of the taxpayers in Georgia are sending money to the state treasury. That money's going right back out the door through these fraudulent returns to thieves. And we need to work on shutting that down. We're going to work on minimizing interest payments that go out and continuing to work on customer service. And then the final slide just mentions a few things related to this legislative session. We have our annual conformity bill. The other piece of legislation that we would like for you all to consider is allowing us to publish letter rulings. It was a recommendation of the special counsel on tax reform. We think it's an excellent change. It would allow the public to see the decisions that we're rendering to private parties in a redacted way so nobody knows their identity. And we certainly hope that you would consider that legislation favorably as your session proceeds. The other thing, the third on the list is at Chairman Chanel's request, we put together a list of seldom used tax credits that are still on the books, that we have regulations on, that there are still laws on the books for, and under the idea that to the extent folks are looking to simplify our tax code, those are places where people could look and choose to do it as you wish. And then obviously tax reform is on the agenda. There's both the governor's package. I'm sure there's other ideas that are out there. And I think my only request in that regard is that the department be part of those conversations so we can make sure we can take whatever ideas y'all create and make sure that we can administer them as efficiently as possible. Again, to my initial point, Georgia being viewed as a tax-friendly state is dependent on two variables. One is the policy y'all have, and the other is our ability to implement it. And us working with y'all and making sure we understand what you're trying to do on the front end makes the administration a whole lot easier and results in Georgia being known as a much more tax-friendly state as we go forward. I am obviously more than happy to answer any questions that you have about the department, about our ITS system, or about any of the information that was in those slides today. And again, look forward to working with you over the coming year.
Minority Leader Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. I had two sort of perfunctory questions. With the rarely used tax credits, are we required by law to allocate funds for those credits irrespective of use? So when we go through the annual budget process, if there's a credit that could be applied for, is there a pool of funds that is allocated for that purpose? Or would we, if someone suddenly decided to use a credit that we hadn't used in 5 years, where would the funds come from to pay for that credit?
I don't think that there's any pools allocated. I think if somebody uses the credit, they just deduct it from their return, and that revenue never appears at the state level.
But we don't. There's nothing currently in our law that would account for a sudden influx of use of credits when we're looking at the revenue estimates, when we're looking at how much we're spending. Okay.
I think that's correct, and what we have is obviously the use of the credits over a period, several years. So I'm sure that those are taken into account during the revenue estimation process. But I think what you've said is correct.
And if I can ask one final question, with the publishing of the letter rulings, are you currently prescribed from publishing letter rulings, or
we've been advised? I'm sorry. No, we've been advised by the Attorney General that it is not clear that we have the authority to do it, and that there's some risk that we violate the confidentiality provisions of the tax code. And their view was it was a much more prudent course to get a legislative change to make sure that it is appropriate and clearly appropriate for us to do that.
Thank you.
Majority Leader O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If it pleases the chair, I've got like 3 questions. I can do one at a time and come back, or
Take as much time as you need, Mr. Leader.
and I want the commissioner to entertain all these as friendly questions, please, because they're not meant to be combative in any way. And I appreciate very much you being here, and I appreciate the time and dedication that you went to prepare this great presentation for us. We're grateful for that. As it relates to the now implemented integrated tax system, I know we've had some great successes in blocking, and I think you were calling them returns, but it's really refunds.
That's correct.
Request for mainly dealing with income tax. I'm curious, with the integrated system, have we made any progress in dealing with refunds within our sales tax system, which sometimes manifest themselves as credits in subsequent sales tax filings that the actual collector and remitter of the taxes files? And are we at a position now with integrated tax where we can track those almost transactionally? And if you don't know that succinctly, I think that's something that we need to see if the system can provide for, if that's not already done.
Yeah, I think the answer is, we've been operating as sales tax on this new platform now for a year and a half, and it is certainly more efficient. There are more efficient ways when people overpay to make credits and to deal with individual transactions. So there have also been kinks in the system, even as recently as November, when we upgraded to a new version of the integrated tax system. There were some issues around filing that we had to work out. So I think it is viewed both internally and by the business community as a stable system today that is better than what was there before, but there's still some improvement that can be done. And I think our view, and certainly my view, having managed big implementations before in the private sector, is you have to view this as a continuing program. You cannot just view it as we've implemented and we are now done for 10 years at the state in modifying this program. In fact, one of the things on the budget side is making sure that there's a continuing funds to constantly update it and take advantage of both what's seen in the real world and improvements in technology. But we can get you specific data if there's a specific information that you are looking for.
And you always do, and your staff is very cordial about that, and I appreciate that. Second question, and I'll try to just really simplify this. Now that we've got everything implemented with what I could tell from your slides except 2 platforms, the only thing left to do is alcohol and tobacco and motor fuel. So if we had 19, that means we have 17 now integrated systems. Is that a correct number?
That is correct.
Can we now track all 118 or however many that number is now exemptions that we have in our tax code? Can we now track all the tax credits that we provide as far as the revenue impact of those particular items, or any other tax preference items that we may call them something else? Can we, as a decision maker and policy maker, now get from you general data without violating any confidentiality as to what the revenue impact is of each of these exemptions, tax preference items, or credits?
I will defer to our experts on the exemptions, because I think some of the exemptions are lumped, but I believe on the credits the answer is yes. Then I can get you a specific answer on the exemptions as well as that if we break that down on our form, because if it's not on our form, we can't capture it. But if it is on our form, I believe we do capture it now. And so going forward, we'd certainly have more detail than we've had in the past and more accurate information. I know the answer is yes on the credits, and I can check on the exemptions for you.
Well, as a follow-up to the credits, we're kind of in a new world there, since we now have transferability of at least 2 credits. I know we have statutorily, and that adds a whole new realm of I guess, problems from the standpoint of tracking those, because it does require interaction between the credit holder, credit seller, credit purchaser, and all of that sort of stuff. So we'll need to hear from you this session what we might need to do if you need more resources to deal with those kind of issues, because it seems to be something that's getting to be high volume these days. Lastly, in the simple question, alcohol, tobacco, motor fuel. Is there anything left? Is that truly all that's left, and what can we expect to kind of close the door on this?
The only thing left after alcohol, tobacco, motor fuel is property, and as you know, the state still collects a very small amount of property tax that is scheduled to run out. I don't think it'd be my recommendation to spend money on moving property over to integrated tax. That there might be people in the department who disagree with that, but in effect, yes, we are done, other than maintaining and continuing to upgrade the system after this fiscal year.
Any other members of the committee have any questions? Vice Chairman Heath.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, how many transactions are processed through the ITS? Have you got it?
Yeah, I'd have to get you an exact number. We have over 4 million individual taxpayers and up to 500,000 businesses that pay tax here in Georgia. So your individual would probably transact 1, maybe 2 transactions a year, either when they file or where they file an amended and then file under the amended. Businesses obviously file on a much more frequent basis. Any sales tax business would be filing monthly and filing their income tax as required, and then also filing withholding, and withholding's done monthly as well. So I don't have off the top of my head the number of transactions that run through that system, but that's something that we can easily get you.
What about cost per transaction? How does that compare under the integrated tax system versus the previous system?
Again, to get you detailed information, we'd have to spend a little time putting that together, but it should be cheaper to run on the new integrated tax system. Again, our old systems were on larger mainframes. These are on servers, and certainly part of I understand part of the sale that was in effect made to y'all in spending $40 million on this was that you would see cost savings after the implementation. One of the struggles, and this is nothing I have not said to him directly, is with the GTA and GETS contract, we've lost some control of our IT expenditures and don't feel like we have the control that I think the department once had prior to that system being put in place. But we can get you a cost per transaction. And one of my jobs over the next period of time is to figure out how we can drive efficiencies through our system and strip out some of that cost now that we've moved to this new platform. I wouldn't give you a number today, but it is certainly on my list and our list to work on.
In your slides, you had some slides demonstrating the improvements in customer service wait time and call abandonment. But even in 2011, there were some numbers up there that frankly was not comforting. There was the initial number, the very beginning of 2011, and I might could understand that at this peak in the number of transactions. But even out later, and I suspect those were around times for quarterly returns to be filed. There were some peaks out there. Maybe they were getting close to 10 minutes. And I think if you're out there trying to run a small business, that would be burdensome, maybe even more so in a large business, to sit on hold for 10 minutes waiting to get to customers. What's the department's plan for improving that, and can you give us some goals on how you intend to improve customer service, how you intend to over time, what should we be able to expect from the department in call wait times, call abandonment, cost per transaction, those type performance figures?
I completely agree with your assessment, and the presentation that that we put together today, and I give to other groups, is not meant to be viewed as we have won the war by any stretch of the imagination. We're not declaring victory and going home. My view, and it's been one that is based on my experience in the private sector, is if you don't measure it, you have no chance of managing it. So the first job is to start measuring it, which we are doing. And the goal that I have set, that that you should expect from me, and I certainly expect from the department over time, is that wait times are in the single digits. There will be times when they creep up to the high single digits, but I would like them to be, and they often are now, in the 1 to 2 minute range. Abandonment range should be similarly in the single digits, because if you answer the phone fast enough, people don't have time to hang up. And that's where they ought to be, and that's what you would see and expect to see in the private sector. So that's where I'd like to get on a consistent basis. As you well noted, we are not consistently there yet. So one, we started measuring it. Two, I made some changes in the management of the department back at the beginning of the year, which I felt were necessary to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And then three, we've allocated some additional resources, both internally and then, as you saw on that one slide around the new compliance positions, y'all also appropriated, in addition to the compliance people who generate work for the department, a sufficient number of customer service folks to handle that as well. But there's some additional steps that we can and will look to take over time, including stratifying the call centers so that easy calls get answered quickly, more complex calls kind of go up to the next tier. Again, that's something you would see in the private sector. We have a special call line for practitioners, for CPAs who don't have the same questions or have the same issues that a normal taxpayer might have. And so there's a bunch of other things that we can do and are working on to help that. The other thing, and I mentioned, is getting people to self-help. If people can go online and check where their refund is at, they don't have to pick up the phone and call us. So anything we can do to knock down call volume helps us. But again, like the big IT projects, my view is it's not a one-time thing. It's kind of like taking out trash. You gotta keep after it every week, and keep making sure you're measuring it. Some things will work, some things won't work. Sometimes we'll do something that causes a spike in call volume, like in November of this past year. So I completely agree with you that by no means have we licked this problem, but we are working on it, and we're open to any good suggestions. In fact, one other thing that's probably worth noting is I try to go speak to as many groups, especially professional groups, CPA groups, as possible. And while the feedback is often painful, it's really helpful to get it so that we know what other things we can do to change to be as helpful and as user-friendly as possible.
Along the same lines, as you mentioned, you need to be able to measure your performance if you're going to manage it. I think it's, as a legislator who's looking at all the challenges that we have where we appropriate money, I think getting estimates from you, goals from you for what you expect from your department, how our investment in the department should manifest itself in more favorable results helps us make better decisions about those appropriations as well. One final thing that came to mind as you were going through your presentation, occasionally there are mistakes made, and I think the integrated tax system helps minimize those mistakes, but occasionally there are mistakes made. I don't know how they happen.
Neither do I.
But they happen, and the department's computer says someone is late on a return, or has not filed a return, or the check doesn't get matched up with the return, or whatever happens, and there's a notice sent out saying that there's a taxpayer in delinquent or in violation or what have you. And then after that, a human gets involved because that taxpayer may call and complain about that, and it's corrected. What can you do to brand those erroneous transmittals so that when people like credit agencies or whatever come back and they see this error, or they don't know it's an error, they see somebody has not was at one time delinquent on taxes, for example, and you later the department later determines that they weren't delinquent, that you can expunge that information or brand it so that no one can mistake that as being a legitimate failure on the taxpayer's part.
It's an excellent question, and I think today, well, one, we have no direct interaction with credit agencies. Credit agencies will go pull whatever public, of course we don't provide taxpayer information to anybody, but they will go pull publicly available information, which means that the delinquency has gotten to the stage that we file what's called a FIFA, but it's a filing in a county that says the certain taxpayer owes the state X dollars. And my understanding is, because this has come up a few times, obviously, because we do make mistakes, that if we recognize we've made a mistake, we will file with the county something that pulls that FIFA and makes clear that it was our error in doing it. Now, what the credit agency does with that information, again, we don't interact directly with credit agencies, but it's something that I think we should continue to look at and be happy to take input from various constituencies to see if we can do more or better than that. We don't want to be in the business of interacting with credit agencies. I don't think that's appropriate for us to do, but I do think when it's been our error, we try to take the appropriate step to take it off the public record. But I'm definitely open to suggestions if folks think there's more or different things that we can be doing going forward. We, the state and the department, has an awful lot of power. And having been on the receiving end of tax notices, again, in my career, it's a daunting thing for an individual to get something from a revenue department and have to deal with it. And one of the things that drives me is making sure that people don't get caught in the maw of the machine and don't have a way out. And I think it's a great issue, and one we need to we do need to look at.
If I may follow up, I know I said that was the final question, but as you were explaining, I had another thought. Occasionally, and this happens more so with electronic systems, when a taxpayer has gone through this process and they're attempting to transfer funds to the state to pay their tax liability.
Yeah.
They hit the send button. Nothing changes on the screen right quick, and they hit it again, and maybe hit it a third or fourth time, and then the system processes it 3 or 4 times, and they've overpaid the state. What can we do to ensure that those returns are made timely, and is there a process, could there be a process where those funds could go back electronically the same path that they came, so they go back into the same account they came from? I don't think it would create a way to defraud the system, but when a taxpayer's made a mistake trying to pay.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and that does happen. It just actually happened a number of times in November when we changed our system. That's one of the things we've cleaned up, so that when you hit submit, you can tell you've hit submit. So it has been an issue in the past. I think we've worked to clean it up, and I do believe there's a way now to just move those funds back efficiently. But to your, one of your points, it is something we need to continue to look at and work on. By no means do I think we are providing the level of customer service that everybody would like to. Some of that is resources, but some of that is just doing things smarter and differently.
Thank you.
Representative Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, just for the benefit of the Commissioner and members of the committee, the HB 100, the tax court bill, which we're now calling the tax tribunal, credit tax tribunal, will deal with your objective of publishing letter rulings. That is a key component of that bill, that we would have findings and rulings by a judge that would be of a benefit to both legal counsel in the future and citizens, and to the department as well too. So just FYI, we're helping you get there with that piece of legislation.
Yeah, and it absolutely does that. And I guess what I was referring to is even before we get to a tribunal, we issue letter rulings from our policy group that aren't part of a legal proceeding, and those are the ones we'd like to make sure we can publish as well. So they would go hand in hand, though, absolutely.
Yeah.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, Commissioner, on behalf of this committee, I want to thank you for being very responsive to our request, and I'm sure we'll have more as we move through the process. This meeting is adjourned.